We are bombarded with the equivalent of 174 newspapers worth of information every day, up from just 40 in 1986. Or we were in 2007 when the estimate was calculated. Who knows what it would be now, how many newspapers we'd be bombarded with now with tweets and TikToks and ads and fake news and real news and propaganda all coming into the mix. It seems that everyone wants a piece of our mind. And they're all trying to use these manipulation tactics to achieve it. For the book, I interviewed an information security expert, and he once received a letter that seemed to be from his bank, but he was rather suspicious because it was using all of these psychological techniques to get him to divulge his personal information. It said you have to act now using urgency, or you could lose your account using loss aversion. So he went to the bank, and he said, I thought you should know someone's trying to scam me. And they said, oh, no, that's us. Yeah. Even the good guys, as well as the bad guys alike, are using these techniques to influence. So it can be very hard to tell what's what. As the kind of pioneer and grandfather, as it were, of propaganda and public relations and marketing, Edward Bernays said, those who understand these manipulation tactics and how to use them, they constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power. His great-grandnephew, by the way, is the co-founder and CEO of Netflix. So make of that what you will. So to give you an example, let's say you go to buy a hotel room, and they say that 10 people have been looking at this room today, and then they say there's only one left on our site, and then they say, well, you can just book it now, or you don't have to pay now, you can pay later. They're using all of these nudges to influence you to get you to buy that room. So those people who understand it and are able to use it, they're really able to influence people's behavior. And it's everywhere, and they're not always transparent, and they can come from some quite surprising sources. And my favorite example of how kind of ubiquitous and kind of weird this is getting is this trend of edible insects, which is, for example, it's been pushed in Great British Bake Off recently. I don't know if you saw that, using ground-up cricket powder in one of the recipes. And noble goal it may be, but it's still very interesting because it's an example of an agenda being pushed from the top down. Nobody's writing into Channel 4, oh, please, can we please see more content about eating insects? Nobody's asking for this. It's being kind of foisted on us from the top. And in particular, there are behavioral scientists' fingerprints all over this. For example, when there are stories about edible insects, you often hear this figure that 2 billion people worldwide eat them, and actually a paper has debunked that. But it's an interesting use of behavioral science. It's using social proof to make it seem popular, and the numbers being framed to make it sound as big as possible. 2 billion sounds like a lot more than 25%, and obviously the mirror conclusion from this is that the vast majority of people, 6 billion, don't eat insects. But that's one nudge that's being used. There are also messenger effects where celebrities like Nicole Kidman and Robert Downey Jr. have been promoting it. And also they're using emotion when they make these products because they use crickets and mealworms, which are kind of nice, friendly insects. Play. And of course, biometrics and neurometrics, which potentially will be able to read and change your mind directly at the source. So it's never been a better time to understand these techniques, and more importantly, how to resist them and maintain your psychological integrity so you cannot be influenced if you don't want to be. And so it's within that context that my co-author Laura and I wrote this book, Free Your Mind. It's a Sunday Times bestseller. That is a nudge. Please buy it. And it is about how to maintain your psychological integrity. So we looked at the latest research on this kind of thing. We interviewed experts from monks to magicians to people in the military. And we also kind of joined some cults. I can't tell you who because they are very litigious. But we did all sorts of research to understand how this manipulation happens and how you can resist it. So here are 10 tips from the book. The first is you can get a level of immunity. Once you know these techniques, once you can spot them, they're less likely to impact you. So if you know about social proof and scarcity, you're less likely to fall for that only one room left and 10 people have been looking at it, a nudge when it's used on the hotel room website. The information security expert I talked to said sometimes it's good to get scammed for £10 because it stops you from getting scammed for £10,000 in the future. So once bitten, twice shy. And there's a study in psychology where they have two teams playing kind of netball, passing the ball to one another, and a person in a gorilla suit walks across the screen. And what they found is about half of participants failed to spot the person in the gorilla suit. But once they know about it, the second time they see the video, everyone spots it. The point being, once you know these techniques, once you see them, you can't unsee them. That's why magicians keep their tricks so secret, because once you know how they work, they stop working. And there's a lot of research recently on what's called psychological inoculation. If you teach people about persuasion techniques, they're less likely to fall for them. Secondly, stop haunting yourself. We spoke to one senior lecturer in political communications, who told us that propaganda is 50% the message and 50% the person. Because what propaganda does is it doesn't create desires and fears within you. Rather, it finds out what your desires and fears are, and it galvanizes them, it uses them to change and push your behavior. So essentially, if you don't control your emotions, someone else will. And in the psychology of scams, this is called the needs and greed principle. Great example is those people who would hang outside Topshop, when that was a thing, on Oxford Street, and scout people as models. And they'd say, oh, you're very attractive, you could be a model. We'll do a photo shoot for you. It only costs £200. And they're using these people's kind of vanity and their desire to be famous and exploiting that wish, that emotion that they have. So you need to, as I said, control your own emotions, or somebody else will. Thirdly, it's very important to stand your ground. Manipulation rarely happens immediately. Rather, it's the result of many small increments. There's a psychological principle called the foot in the door technique, where in one study, people were 25% more likely to agree to put a large, ugly, safe driving sign in their front garden if they agreed to a smaller request beforehand, so taking a bumper sticker. So normally, large things are broken down into small, acceptable things. I promised myself I wouldn't talk about politics, but I've started, so I will. A good example might be ULEZ, which started as the congestion charge, then it became the low emission zone, then the ultra low emission zone, then it went into outer London. It's probably going to go into other countries. You have low traffic neighborhoods, etc. So they're not kind of introducing these kind of blanket bans on petrol and diesel cars overnight because people would rebel, but rather breaking it down into small increments. So when I interviewed a magician, I asked, how can you not get tricked by magicians? And his answer was very simple. He said, don't go to the show. So if you don't want to get influenced, you kind of have to cut yourself off a little bit. Pavlov found that the only dogs he couldn't condition were those who just ignored the bell in the first place. So you need to kind of be a bit like that. And even if you engage with these messages critically, they can still influence you. There's a saying that if you hang around in a barber's long enough, sooner or later you'll get your hair cut. Next, get it in writing. We have had eyes for much longer in our evolutionary history than we've had language, and so in psychology there's something called the picture superiority effect, where images tend to be more attention-grabbing, more emotional, more memorable, more persuasive than words. And some research shows that images have a persuasive and lasting impact even if you're later told that they weren't real, which is quite a frightening prospect given Mid-Journey and everything like that. On the other hand, reading is slower, is more meditative. It gives you time to breathe, to digest what you're consuming, and to kind of integrate it with your previous belief structures. When you're reading a book or a newspaper, you can close it and look out the window and think about what you just read. And that's why one study in Canada found that people's political opinions were a lot more stable if they got their news from newspapers compared to the TV. TV is an image is 1,000 words, so a video is 10,000 words, it kind of overloads your ability to critically digest what you're seeing. So if you have something important to decide, make sure you get all the information in writing. The next rule is to watch out for the blip. So with classic brainwashing, as it were, in, let's say, prisoner of war camps, there's really two parts of the process. You need to break people's old ideas down, and then you need to reshape that into something new. It's an old principle called dissolve and reassemble. And so to break people's kind of old ideas down, to break down their conscious defenses, there are a number of things that can be done. So on a very small scale, if you're hungry or stressed or tired, you're more vulnerable to influence. So try not to watch adverts last thing at night, for instance. On a slightly larger scale, people are more likely to join multi-level marketing schemes if they've just moved house or been through a divorce. And on the biggest scale, politicians are more likely to push through agendas if the country has just gone through a big shock, like a pandemic or an economic crisis or a war. There's a great book called The Shock Doctrine about this. So just beware of the blip. Try not to make decisions if you're under stress or hungry or tired, and so on. Oh, and there's a picture of Baby Shark because in one prison, they played Baby Shark on repeat for hours at night to wear down the prisoners. So if somebody's doing that, try not to make any important decisions. Now, you might think that being smart would give people a certain level of protection against manipulation, but actually, a lot of research shows that there's no correlation, or in fact, there might be a small positive correlation between cognitive ability and vulnerability to bias, or at least certain biases. As George Orwell kind of said, there are some things so absurd only an intellectual could believe them. Arthur Conan Doyle, for example, believed that fairies existed, and he believed seances were real. And that might be because his son had recently died in World War I, and so he was looking for proof. He was rationalizing his kind of emotional belief that there was something beyond. And that's a principle called motivated reasoning. So our beliefs tend to be influenced by emotion and by circumstances. Smart people are just better at rationalizing and explaining them. Also, smart people tend to be more conscientious and agreeable, generally a good thing. It means they're more organized and cooperative, but it can also mean they're more likely to follow authority and more likely to follow the crowd. And so what you can do about that, obviously, it's good to be smart, of course, but sometimes make sure you listen to your gut. And one study found a 15-minute mindfulness meditation reduced the incidence of one cognitive bias by 34%. Next, consider your options. You can't push a donkey from behind. And in folklore, in symbolism, the devil always gives you a choice. That's why you sell your soul down at the crossroads, because it's your choice which way you go, whether you do it or not. If you try and force people to do something, you'll produce what's called reactants. So if you try and tell a teenager they're not allowed to smoke, they probably will then go out and smoke to exert their agency and autonomy. So as I said, you can't force people to do things, but there's a principle called the but you are free technique. If you end a request with something like, well, it's up to you, it's your choice, people are twice as likely to comply. And so rather than forcing you, what manipulators often do is design the choice architecture in a way to get the outcome that they want. So a magician can't force you which card to choose, then the trick wouldn't work, but they do stack the deck in their favor. And an example of this, of course, is if the waiter asks you, do you want still or sparkling? Well, there's a lot more beyond that false binary of still and sparkling. You could have nothing. You could have free tap water. So manipulators try and kind of control what your choices are so you feel like you do have a choice. It's very important, of course, to question authority. There's many examples of people who, because they didn't want to rock the boat, they wanted to conform. It ended with bad outcomes. For example, I think there were some accidents among Korean pilots because they felt like they couldn't question their superiors at work. So it's very important to kind of pull the curtain back and reveal and ridicule the manipulator as just a small person, because often they get power from the illusion of power, like in World War I and II, where they used inflatable tanks to make the army seem bigger than it was. So be a bit more like this guy. It's okay to be a bit disagreeable and grumpy and curmudgeonly sometimes, like Socrates was before they killed him, admittedly. It's okay to not always conform to the crowd. Penultimately, it's important to stand for something, or otherwise you'll fall for anything. There's a lot I could say about this, but essentially, we're all going to die one day. Happy Sunday. And we don't really like facing up to that fact. It's terrifying. And so we tend to distract ourselves, whether it's with Netflix, or drinking, or hobbies, or community, or joining cults, because it gives us purpose and security and certainty. So if you have that certainty, if you're anchored to something, you're less likely to get swept away. And there's a book called The Denial of Death, which is about this, by a psychoanalyst called Ernst Becker. And the Ernst Becker Foundation suggested that people stockpiled toilet roll in the early days of COVID because as humans, the first time we're consciously aware of our mortality is during potty training, because we realize that our body is kind of stenching and decaying beyond our control. And so the theory is, people were faced with mortality, and so they bought toilet roll and other cleaning products to feel like they could clean away the stench of their mortality. On a smaller scale, if you go into a casino with a budget, you're less likely to overspend. If you go shopping with a list, you're less likely to impulse buy. So just have a plan, have a purpose and structure. And finally, I want to ask, which of these lines do you think is longer, the top one or the bottom one? Who would say the bottom one is longer? Who would say the top one is longer? And who's going to be smart and say they're both the same? Yeah. Okay, so you rationally, consciously, you know they're both the same, but you can't still unsee the fact that the bottom one looks longer. And in the same way, you can get some immunity to these biases, but they can still influence you. For example, you may know that De Beers allegedly artificially restrict the supply of diamonds in the world to make them scarce, so you value them more. You might know that rationally, and yet if I said who wants a diamond, I'm sure you'd all love one. So you can't always not be biased. Which comes to the last point, which is that you can't not be manipulated. It's impossible. Maybe if you live in a flotation tank in Siberia, you might be able to. But generally, you can't avoid influence, because all communication is influence. All communication is designed to persuade. But what you can do is choose your manipulator. You can't leave Plato's cave, but you can swap it for a nicer one. So instead of following people on Twitter who are angry, you could follow people who are happy and who tell you how to be healthier and happier and wealthier. If you want to see the world in a more poetic way, you just need to read more poetry. And I think there's a huge power in that. And that ultimately is how you can free your mind. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, it's really interesting. It also is, it's kind of scary because it's like, wow, you really have to remember a lot of things to defend yourself against. And I wonder, is there it seems that basically the introduction of the smartphone is probably what accelerated a lot of this, just because, it just was easier to get to your mind by various folks, sort of thing. Is one of the interventions that let's assume we can play God here, if you will, where there is some sort of layer that controls to some extent, or at least monitors the sort of stuff that's been going on, so that to protect citizens against online influence, or influence of any kind for that matter, to so they aren't being led astray into doing things against their interest.
Well, that's definitely important, but I think there's a lot of danger there, again, kind of outsourcing our thinking to some kind of algorithm to tell us whether something is trying to persuade us or not, because that's really what makes us vulnerable, is when we're not thinking. So, for example, the authority bias is where we trust figures in authority, and generally speaking, that makes a lot of sense, because we don't have time to read all the papers and do all the thinking and everything. But then the problem is, when we outsource it too much, that's when we can become vulnerable and it can be exploited, which we've seen throughout history. So I think it is important to still have some personal responsibility. And it doesn't have to, I know it sounds intimidating, but you can nudge yourself. You can use the foot in the door technique on yourself and just start with some small things. just try going for one day without your phone every weekend. See how that goes to start. Change your screen from in color to black and white. They're just very small things, but once you do them cumulatively, they can have big effects.
Okay, and I mean, you obviously gave us a list of top 10 things, but is there as an expert that's seen study this now across multiple fields, is there an area that you find most worrying, or just like that in terms of just whether it be democracy or just the sort of human health or?
Yeah, I mean, this might not be a very popular answer, but I think the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and so, and also I'm rationalizing because I still do this as a job, so I help brands and advertisers do it. But I think with government, there's a lot more potential for it to go awry because they have so much more power and they have kind of a moral imperative to achieve. Whereas with Coca-Cola, they just want you to buy more Coca-Cola, and it's kind of transparent and limited.
Okay, so do you mean that once governments kind of start doing these nudges and things like that, that's where you kind of fear things going, I think that's most badly wrong?
Probably where there's more potential, especially at the minute they're not particularly accountable. So there's been cases, the nudge unit in the UK, the head of the nudge unit talked about how he designed his PowerPoints to the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson at the time, to nudge how he saw the situation and to nudge his behavior. And you might agree with his goals, but he's completely unaccountable, and he's using these techniques to influence the most powerful person in the country.
Okay, got you.
He just needs to be more accountable, I think.
Interesting, right. So it's actually not the politicians per se, but actually the people that work for them, supporting them, that could be using exactly the same techniques to achieve whatever aims they may see fit.
Yeah, I mean, being transparent about nudges doesn't make them less effective. It might even make them more effective. So I think it's just about being transparent, who's using them, how, and accountable, and letting people kind of choose. Because there's a new trend in nudging to let people choose their own nudging. It's called boosts. I think there's a lot of power in that.
Interesting. Would you see an AI future where, I'm sure where you have a digital assistant that basically red flags, effectively, if you will, this manipulation?
Yes, again, I mean, outsourcing our thinking to AI is kind of maybe a bit dangerous. I actually let AI control my day for the day to see what happens, and I ended up eating 3 pizzas, which...
So win.
It was good at first, so I'm not too worried about it now, and it actually did make life a lot easier, but again, I think we just need to...
No, you're I mean, in the same way that you can outsource your thinking to Google Maps, right? And I think, generally speaking, that has worked pretty well for people.
Very
Obviously,
well,
occasionally, disasters, ensue. So, yeah. Okay, Patrick, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, great to see you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can I get your cheers?